Thank you so much for your support. I know a lot of you aren't students. Thank you for your support of our ministry here. It's fantastic. And students, thanks for picking to come here tonight versus the concert or whatever else you have going on. It means a lot, you know, it's showing what you guys care about. So thank you for being here. During the presentation, you're welcome to get up and get snacks over there, waters. I also have a sheet out. If you're not on my bulletin, this could be for anybody, and you want to get on my bulletin, you get a message every Monday, just one. You're welcome to put your name and email address on that piece of paper. Students are already automatically added. You can unsubscribe if you want. But anybody else, it's over there next to the pens. You're welcome to take the pens and the stickers too. Okay? All right, so this is Father Szada. He comes to us from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, not too far from here where Knoebels is. He lives in the old monastery. I don't know if you consider it old, but the sisters aren't there anymore. And he does say Latin Mass every day. And on Sundays at 8 a.m.?
Sundays at 9.
9 a.m., okay. And we are just so blessed to have him here. He is the exorcist of our diocese. For a long time now it was a secret. Now it's not a secret. Just broadcast it to everybody. He's been our exorcist for 11 years. He has a lot of experience with us. And we are blessed to have you. Thank you, Father.
Until they get that working, I'll just stand out here, okay? And feel free if at any time you don't hear me or you have a question or you're not sure about something, feel free to raise your hand. I have no problem with that. We're going to take your questions. But as in always, we begin with a prayer. In the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Saint Michael the Archangel, the friend of Szada, your protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God give you the common for it. The law by the power of God, cast into hell Satan, all the evil spirits, who round about the world seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. Our Lady of Seven Sorrows, in the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. So I know your first question will be, why did I say Our Lady of Seven Sorrows? Because she actually is the patroness of exorcists, believe it or not, okay? The devotion to the seven sorrows of the Blessed Virgin is the only apparition of the Blessed Virgin, devotion to the Blessed Virgin, in which there is specific promises of protection against demonic influence. Okay, so she's actually considered the patroness of exorcists. So therefore, a special devotion to her. So, one little bit about me. First of all, they really didn't tell me what I was going to talk about that tonight. Okay, so what I thought I would do is tell you just a little bit about me, and then ask you just randomly, why are you here? What do you want to hear? All right, and then I can launch off from that. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, where I'm coming from. First of all, I've been a priest for 44 years. I have been the exorcist of the diocese for 11 years. I have 5 academic degrees. Okay, so I have my first degree from Penn State University was in Foreign Service and International Politics, and then a Master's of Divinity, and then I have a bachelor's, master's, and a PhD in psychology. So I can handle all these questions from all of those different levels. And I guarantee you I do, and I have to every single day. So that gives me an idea. Let's just say I wasn't bragging with that. Just want you to know where I'm coming from. And if you have a question that you want to ask from one perspective or another, I'll be happy to see what I can do to help you out with those. But before we even get into that, I'm just going to share a little something with you. It is actually related in a certain way. So when they were playing with the switches over here and the lights all went down, and I said, "We got hooks." I mean, you know what that means?
On the light.
No, let there be light. Let there be light. Okay. If you read your Bible carefully, by the way, I know why a lot of the people from Sacred Heart are here, because you heard me preach at Sacred Heart not too long ago, right? And that particular Sunday, I was going in for Father because he had been ill, but I spoke that Sunday about the 7 times in the Gospel where the devil tries to kill Jesus. Most people don't realize that's there, but I laid them all out that day. I'm not going to talk about it tonight. But anyway, one of the things that's rather fascinating is you read your scripture very carefully. at the creation story, Genesis, very beginning, the only thing it does not, that God does not create is light. You read it very carefully. It says, God said, let there be light. And there was light. Everything else, if you read it, it says, God said, and he created the animals, he created the sun, he created the moon. Not light. The only thing he said he does not create is light. He spoke, and it was. Now, how that's related is the fact that scripture scholars tell us that that is most likely the point at which God brought the angels into existence. Right? They are the lights. Rather fascinating is the fact that there's two levels in which the angelic spirits, again, I talk about angels, but that's a generic term, because we know there are 9, what we call choirs of angels, 9 different divisions of these angelic spirits. From the highest, with the seraphim, to the lowest, who are the angels, or we would call guardian angels. But what happens is immediately after they're being brought into existence, they are given a choice. They must make a choice. Now, do not think that the devil chose evil. That's how he became the devil. It is impossible for anyone, for any rational being, to choose evil. Can't do it. Right? The human nature doesn't function that way. Human beings can only choose the good. You say, well, wait a minute, people do evil things all the time. Yeah, that's not it. For example, if you choose to rob a bank, why would you rob a bank? Bingo. In other words, you don't rob a bank because it's wrong. You rob the bank because you see the good that you're going to get out of it and the money that you're going to get. In other words, we have to shift our perspective to make something look good, even though it's not. Murdering another human being. You say, well, why would anybody kill another person? That's evil. Well, yeah, but we don't think of it that way. We twist it in our own mind. Make a good out of it. So Lucifer was the highest of all created angelic beings, if you will. He's given a choice. And he did not choose evil. Right? His choice was to choose the good or to choose a higher good. To choose the higher good was to choose God in his supernatural destiny. What he chose was a lesser good. What do you think that lesser good was? What do you think? He's pointing different. I kind of want to answer the question. That's that difference. Yes, exactly. He chose himself. That's a good. And it's a lesser good than the higher good that God had in store. Not only for him, but for all of us. This is how evil enters into the world. Okay? Choosing the lesser good, choosing the self over the higher destiny that we're called to, right? Which is in God. So that's the whole point. This is where evil comes from. See, remember this. Pure evil does not exist. Pure evil is non-existence. Okay? Anything that exists, to the extent that it exists, is good, including the devil. Satan himself is good only to the extent that he exists. Because if God was not in him, he would not exist. Pure evil is non-existence. Okay? So that's the whole point, though. In fact, this has come up in a controversial statement and I'm not going to take sides here, but I'm only bringing up the point because it was made. Pope Francis and several others talking about hell. And some people say, well, if God is so good, why would he create a place where somebody would suffer for all eternity? And Pope Francis actually made the statement on 4 different occasions in which he said that he actually believes that that people don't go to hell for all eternity, that when they die, they just simply cease to exist. He has said that. I'm not taking out of context or anything like that. And I'm not passing judgment on him, but that's where it actually manifests itself today in some ways. You might have heard it, I might feel it. So non-existence is pure evil, right? So the devil would use the good, but twist it in order to trick us. There's where the problem is, right? God will twist, the devil will twist the good to make it appear good so that we will choose it. So, first one question that people ask me oftentimes is, well, why did you choose to become an exorcist? And I say, well, because the bishop said to me one day, I want you to be my exorcist. And so it was. That's just the way it happens. And as we said at the very beginning, there used to be a time when the identity of the diocesan exorcist was a top secret. Only the bishop and the priest knew who it was, right? But truth is that evil has come out into the world. The demonic has come out into the open. You see it every day all over the place. And so as a result of which, I won't have to shout them. And so as a result of which, because of that, the exorcist has to come out into the open so that people know where to turn when they're in trouble. You know where to turn when they are looking for help from the demonic. Okay? And the demonic is all around us. So let's see if we're working. Nope, it's not working. Okay. So we'll keep shouting. Not working. Well, thank you for your episode. All right. So anyway, that was kind of an introduction. You tell me what you're here for, and I'll see what I can build on. Anybody? What are you looking for? Okay, it's a good question. I'll come back to it. He was talking about UFOs and those kinds of phenomena. All right. Any other ideas?
How common is demonic possession and obsession today? Like, let's just say in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Is it common or not?
Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
I'm a kind of a psychologist, and I would like to have some clarification.
Very good. I'm not anticipating of the fact that. All good points. Let's bring up some more questions. Okay, so. Psychedelic. I mean, that's a big one today. I mean, even the American Psychological Association, which I've been wrong, now has a whole division devoted to religious experience and psychedelics. I'm just flabbergasted when I read this. And I can't believe it. But anyway, yes. Is there very what?
Discernment of real truth versus the truth at the end of the secret.
Oh, another good question. So,
You said like rules kind of like pursuing. What's the balance between benefits humans as opposed to just like benefiting yourself directly? Like how do you kind of find the balance of finding the
good question. Very good question. Okay, sir.
What was the time period where the diocesan exorcist became public knowledge?
Oh, when did that happen?
Yeah.
Well, I would say, I've been an exorcist for 11 years, and I would say that it was probably not too often long after I became the exorcist that it became more open.
And does a former exorcist, does that become known, or is that kept a secret?
I think his identity is still secret. Yes. Okay, so those are all good questions. Let me see if I can build on some of those and tie some of those ideas together. First of all, how common are these experiences today? Well, I would say that with the rise of the occult into the mainstream, they're becoming more and more and more common, unfortunately, right? So I talked to the priest who was the exorcist before me, and he had been the exorcist for a number of years. And I asked him, did he ever have an actual formal case of possession for a person who's actually possessed? And he said, no. Right? In the 11 years that I've been an exorcist, I would say I've had at least 6, right, over the last 11 years, but people who are actually possessed, demonically possessed. Right? So it is still relatively rare, but becoming far more common than it used to be, because people are getting into the occult, and they don't realize what they're getting into. That's the thing. So let's start off, first of all, how does the devil influence us? I would suggest that there are 4 primary ways in which the devil plays his games with us. Right? The first is one that we all experience: pure and simple temptation. Right? We are all tempted every single day. It's part and parcel of human nature. We have a broken, fallen human nature, as a result of which we're open to temptation. We're open to being self-centered, self-focused. Right? That's the way it is. It's an interesting thing. I try to make a distinction between self-consciousness and self-awareness. Sometimes people use those 2 terms interchangeably, but I say they're not. Okay. The very first thing, when Adam and Eve were created in the garden, they were self-aware. But the first thing that happened after they committed the original sin was what? Yeah, I did. Why? Why? Exactly. Because they realized they were naked, so they clothed themselves. That's self-consciousness. That's self-consciousness. So something changed before and after they committed the sin. They went from being self-aware to being self-conscious. Self-awareness is an objective perspective on reality. Self-consciousness is a subjective perspective on reality, a me-centered perspective. Can we ever distinguish between those 2? I mean, do we ever really take the time to try to step back and look at things from an objective point of view rather than a subjective point of view? And the answer today is no, we don't. In fact, we reinforce, constantly reinforcing my own subjective point of view. If I think it is, then it is. That's the whole basis of all of the sexual things that are going on today, right? But here's what I like to do, and I do this all the time. Right? So, somebody else. What color is that? Okay, big. What if I say, you never know, it's blue? What's your response to that? But the times we did then say that my perspective on reality, I create my own reality. So if I say that that's blue, then for me it's blue. Right? You agree with that? There's the problem. This is not blue. It's beige. My thought doesn't change the objective reality of that wall, of that color. Right? And yet that's the culture we live in today. I insist that my perspective is reality, and you better tie into it, or else we're going to destroy you. You better accept my vision of reality, or else. So as I said, temptation is the first, and the biggest temptation is to put ourselves first. My perspective, self-consciousness, everything comes to me, right? Everything flows from me. That's the first thing. So what happens from that thing is we have next what we would call demonic oppression. People get into such deep things sometimes that they actually get attacked, right? And it may happen physically, it may happen spiritually, it may happen on many different levels. And the people do get attacked by the demons once they've gotten themselves deeply enough into it. And how people can get into it is really amazing, really amazing. Even in ways in which they may not even realize that they're doing it. But for example, as college kids, generally college girls tend to be, sorry girls, but you know, playing with tarot cards, or Ouija boards. I had a case once that was really interesting. One of our priests called me and said, I have a young man in my parish, he's like really scared. I said, well, what happened? He said, well, this young man, his friend said there's this house that's supposed to be haunted. And they want to go over there to this house and they want to play with a Ouija board and see if anything really happens. Right? So the guy said to them, well, okay, get me drunk and I'll go. So they did, and he went. Although I suspect he did more than just drink some alcohol. But anyway, so they went and they played with this Ouija board. Guess what? It worked. And of course, the spirit is telling them, don't worry, everything stays here in this house. It will not go with you home, blah, blah, blah. All right, he goes home. Well, the first thing you have to learn about the devil is that he's a liar. Pure and simple. Right? Jesus himself said he is the father of lies. Right? So the guy goes home, and guess who follows him? Right? He's waking up at night. He's feeling touches. He's seeing spirits in the room. All kinds of stuff. He's freaking out. He calls his priest. The priest calls me. What do we do? Right? I said, this one's easy. Believe it or not, stupid kid. You know, let's tell him to go to confession. That's all I needed to do. He did something really dumb under the influence of alcohol or whatever, and so he went to confession. He didn't take it any further than that. He didn't take it any more seriously than that. He went to confession. End of story. Right? Very simple one in that case. Right? So that's an easy one. All right, that's how we can get into things. But sometimes it can get much worse. But before I get into the worst ones, so that's demonic oppression. We can be, and another one, I'll give you an example just so that you're aware of these things. People will call me all the time, look, my dad is seeing these figures in the room, or these spirits in the room, or these shadows in the room. So, you know, what is it? There's an interesting, easy rule of thumb. Be able to tell whether we're dealing with what I call souls from purgatory, asking for prayer, or demonic entities. Right? Comes down to this. If I see a full body figure, number one, it's most likely a soul in purgatory. If I see a half figure or a shadow or something like that, it's most likely a demon. Number two, souls in purgatory don't engage in conversations. If anything, they're only there to ask for prayer, nothing else. But if something is engaging you in some kind of dialogue, it's a demon, because that's what they want to do. They want to trick you. They want to draw you in. They want to get your attention. Right? So if there is an ongoing conversation, don't pay attention. Right? Forget it. Block it out. Those are demons. The other question that we have to ask is, why is the demon there in the first place? That could be another whole issue. Come back to that in a second. So that's another thing. So, you know, those are the kinds of things that these oppressions can kind of take place. And people are, you know, wondering how this happens and why does this happen? Which also then leads us to a third element, and what we might call obsession, or not obsession, but infestation. So infestation is, you know, when we go back to those experiences, you talk about UFOs, you talk about haunted houses, you talk about all of those other kinds of things, right? Those are, generally speaking, demonic. Right? So you have situations where, I'll give you an example. I just had one recently, and this was in the news. So this is not, you know, confidential information. And it happened in Lancaster. Who's from Lancaster? Lancaster? Okay, happened in Lancaster. Had a situation of a gentleman who was an undertaker. And he was arrested for neglection of bodies. Right? There was not any kind of sexual things involved. He just neglected to care for the bodies that were in his care. Right? He didn't involve them correctly, or he left them lying around, or he misplaced the ashes. He did all kinds of very strange things. Right? And so he was arrested. He actually went to jail. As I said, I actually heard it on the news before they called me. And so another family purchased the building, a Catholic family, an undertaking family, and they wanted to transform it, but they were worried about there were different things that were going on within the building. And so they said, what should we do? So I went down to Lancaster and I did what we call a minor exorcism of a place. And then I told the local pastor that whenever he has a chance to go and celebrate a mass there in that building for the repose of all of the souls who may have been neglected while their bodies were there in that place. So that's kind of an infestation that can happen, right? That demons could, so you have situations where, for example, a person commits suicide, violent suicides, those sorts of things. I have one right now. I was mentioning to people beforehand. It's up in Mifflin County. A young man who died, and at this point they're still waiting for the autopsy results. They don't know if it was a drug overdose, a suicide, or a homicide. They're still not sure, right? So the autopsy gives the results. But anyway, when his family went to his home, there was also a woman and her children living with him, and they skedaddled right away. And the body was found. When they went to his home, began to clean out the home, they found a room in that home that was filled, and I mean filled, with every sort of occult material that you could possibly imagine. And you go in there were tarot cards, Ouija boards, crystal balls, you name it, star charts, everything you could possibly imagine in an occult thing was there in that room. Right? And obviously the house itself, you could feel the negativity in that house. Right? So what we have to do in this particular case is, the first thing they did was do a minor exorcism of the house. And then what we have to do for this family is all of that material there has to be destroyed in one way or another. But the first thing I have to do is to do prayers of protection for the family. They'll wear gloves before they take anything out. Anything that can be destroyed has to be destroyed or burned. And then all of the material that is gathered up at the end will be buried in some sacred spot someplace. And we have a large St. Benedict medal. Anybody have the St. Benedict medal?
No, I don't have something. But I was gonna ask a question.
Well, let me finish this story, then you can go to
Okay, go
the.
ahead.
So we have a large St. Benedict medal, and anybody who has a St. Benedict medal or wants to get one, don't just ask the priest to bless it. It has to be exercised. All right? So it's St. Benedict medal. It's a very special medal. It needs to be exercised, but any priest can do it, so it's not a problem. All right? But there's like 4 or 5 prayers that have to be said over it. And then when we bury all of this material, then this metal will be placed on top of the pile and then everything covered over. All right, so that's what we have to do with all of that material. All right, it has to be destroyed and then buried someplace. Yes.
I was gonna ask if you have to destroy things, how if you don't burn it?
Well, for example, the crystal ball, you smash it, whatever you can break, bend,
Oh, so you just really just destroy it?
Yeah.
Okay.
you can destroy anything like that, yes. What you can burn can be burned, but what can't be burned has to be somehow broken or shattered or somehow like that, yes. Okay? So that's what happens. So sometimes there can be infestations. And there are other ways in which it's kind of like a dual thing where an oppression and an infestation will kind of go together. I've had several really interesting ones. For example, and almost all of these cases I'm telling you are things that I've actually been involved with. Once in a while, I'll share some other cases that I know of, but most of them are ones that I actually know of. For example, I had a man in New York. He was hearing a voice in his house. Okay? And I made a number of visits to his house. We kept trying to find out what the problem was. And never saw anything, but we could hear this, but he could hear this voice. And we kept trying to figure out where it was coming from, but you couldn't hear what it was saying. One day I was there and I was at the door to leave the house. And as I stood at the door, I heard the voice myself. So I turned around to him and I said, Tim, I heard it. I know what you're talking about now. I said, what we have to determine now, is this a soul in purgatory asking for prayer, or is this a demon trying to trick you? So once we figure that out, then we'll know how to handle it, right? Next thing I know, I get a phone call from Tim, panicking. And guess what Tim did? Tim called in a paranormal investigating team. They set up their cameras and their microphones and the video recorders and all that kind of stuff. And he said, oh, hell has broken loose here. I said, no wonder, Tim. You opened the gates of hell. You issued an invitation. Come on in. We want to record you. We want to video you. And I have to go and clean up the mess. Literally, it's unbelievable. There's another one. I've made the round there for a while. I've encountered it twice now. Especially among college students. Have you heard of speak boxes? You've heard of them? Oh, okay. Anybody speak boxes? Okay. A speak box, he's telling you something. A speak box is almost like a cell phone. Okay. I haven't checked lately, but you used to actually be able to buy them on Amazon. The speak box was designed in such a way to allow you to communicate with the dead. So I had one case of a lady, she had a brother, younger brother, autistic, I believe. And this particular brother, she cared for him, really loved him deeply, and he died. And she was feeling really distressed. Was he okay? What happened? So forth. One of her friends said, well, get a speak box and you can communicate with him and see how he is. So she did, right? She gets the speak box and starts talking to this voice. And the voice assures her that it's her brother and he's well and everything's fine and not to worry. And she's happy, only now she starts experiencing all kinds of things in the house, right? And that's typical stuff, the knockings and bangings and things moving and all that other kind of stuff. And so she calls me and she said, what can I do? And I said to her, well, first of all, you have to realize the fact that we're not speaking to your brother. This was a demon who was pretending to be your brother. Right? And that's just the way it is. Right? You have to be very, very careful with these kinds of things. And again, now she has opened the door. She has made a choice to do something that allowed the demon entry into her life. Right? Now it's very, very difficult to undo that. Very difficult. I had another case 2 weeks ago of a person who was doing the same thing. Her husband had died, and again, a friend said get a speak box, and she was talking to her husband, but for some reason they haven't followed through on it with me. I don't know what's happening to her because she hasn't called me back. But maybe she's content with whatever is going on in her life. But I guarantee you it won't be good. So these are the kinds of things that people are getting into. They're getting into all kinds of stuff. So it happens sometimes now that people get so deeply into some of these things, intentionally or otherwise, that it leads them to even deeper things, which is actual demonic possession, right? So I'll give you one case that I knew about, but I didn't know her directly, but I knew about it. In this particular case, a young girl, her grandmother would practice reading tarot cards. And as a child, she used to sit on her grandmother's lap. Didn't do anything, just sat there while the grandmother did her thing. Okay? So now the young lady has grown up and she's in college. And one night, as the girls were getting together, they said, oh, let's do tarot cards. They get the little book out and they're trying to figure out what this is. And the girl's standing there. And she said, oh, I know what that stuff means. My grandmother did all the time. She interprets the tarot cards for her friends. She's fully possessed. The demon comes out and says, "Stupid witch, I had to sit in her for 20 years just waiting for her to make the first move." She put her foot into it, and she was fully possessed. Fully possessed. That's a difficult situation to live, but remember, that's just what happens. We have to be really, really careful because there's so much stuff out there these days that people can trip and fall into. Now, it works other ways too. I'll give you an example, and I will come back to the question about the distinctions. The very, very first case that I ever had of a person who was authentically possessed, and going back to the question you were about, what you see in the movie versus the reality. Okay. In this particular case, it was in Lebanon, and it was a Hispanic family. Mother was Puerto Rican, the father was Cuban. The father was a practitioner of Santeria. Anybody ever hear of Santeria? Some of you are shaking your heads, okay? It's a Hispanic cult. And this young girl, we're talking about a petite, maybe 18-year-old Hispanic girl, manifesting all kinds of things. I go to their home, and I'm sitting at the table. I'm at this end, she's at that end. The mother is here, and her brother is here. Her brother was the typical football player type guy, right? Big, husky guy, right? And we are talking, and I'm trying to get the background, trying to get the history. And all of a sudden, this young lady's eyes have rolled up into her eyes. Right? Get out of my house. This deep, guttural voice. And she leaps across the table at me. Right? Her brother leaps across the table at her. Right? Table goes flying, everybody goes flying, things are rolling on the floor. He's trying to, this petite girl, right? And he finally brings her down. So, after more investigation, we find out that she really is possessed, right? But in this particular case, it wasn't her fault, right? Because what had happened was her father, being a practitioner of Santeria, disowned her and her mother at her birth, okay? In fact, I found out later, the mother had to actually take a taxi home from the hospital after giving birth to the baby. And so when we finally, we did schedule the exorcism, and this was an interesting one. It was very simple. I took one session, right? In an actual possession, you're actually able to ask demons certain questions, right? So the first question is, how many of them, how are you? And they said 3. And what gave you the right to be here? Well, that's going to be a very important point, right? I'll come back to that in a second. What has given you the right to be here? Her father promised her to us at her birth. Okay, so it wasn't her fault. But the father had legal authority over his daughter when she's an infant. And therefore, she's now under demonic possession. We freed her very quickly. Right? Realize the fact that demons are legalists, right? I always say demons make either very good lawyers or very good Catholics. They're legalists. They play by the book, right? And you have to know that. Otherwise, they'll trick you, right? You have to play by the book or else. So the sad thing about this is, right, we freed this young lady, but unfortunately, here's the other thing that you have to realize, that an exorcism is not a magic formula. It's not a magic ritual. They don't do the prayers and you're free. An exorcism is actually the beginning of a conversion process. There has to be a transformation of life. In this particular case, this young lady did not change. She just continued on doing the same old stuff that she had been doing all along, which wasn't good stuff. Guess what? She became repossessed. Remember that story in the Gospels where Jesus says, he cast the demon out, and the demon goes wandering in the desert. Says, I'm going back to the place where I was, and finds the place all neat and tidy and clean. And he goes out and finds 7 other demons, and they come back in, and now the place is worse than it was at first, right? It's exactly what happened in this case. Not what happened, because The house was empty. There was nothing to fill it up. After the demon was cast out, there was nothing good brought in. Right? So now she's sitting duck. And I guarantee you, the second time was much, much worse than trying to free her from possession. Took a long time. It's not just in one session and we're done. It literally, sometimes it'll take years to be able to free a person from being possessed. Now, it didn't used to be that way. It didn't used to be that way. As has been said oftentimes, you see, when a priest stands up and does an exorcism, it's not the priest who's doing the exorcism. Of course, first and foremost, it's Christ. But it's the power and authority of the church. It's the faith of the church flowing through him, right, to perform the rituals that need to be performed. If the faith is weak, right, if the faith of the church is lacking, what does the priest have to fight with? That's why it takes much, much harder, much longer to be able to free people sometimes. Sorry? Actually, things what? Okay. I'm going to get back to that. I'm going to go into that with that other thing as well. Okay. So yeah, so sometimes it becomes very, very difficult to cast the demons out. Okay, so let's look at that. Yeah. Person comes to me, and for one reason or another, they're manifesting different issues. The first thing I do is I always ask them questions, right? We get a history. Actually, it's just like when you go to the doctor and you have to do an intake form. I have a 7 or 8 page questionnaire that we give a whole history of their background, all the different stuff, right? We go through that first and foremost. Then the second thing is I'll ask them, have you ever seen a psychologist or a psychiatrist or on a therapy of any kind, right? And if they say yes, all right, then I'll say, are you on medication? And if they say to me, yes, and I say, well, does the medication help? And if they say, yes, it does, that's a clue. It's probably mental illness, right? At least at heart. If they say, no, the medication doesn't help at all, then it's a clue. It's probably spiritual, probably at heart. Right? So that's the first thing I do. So I always send them there for an evaluation. I may have a pretty good idea of what I'm dealing with because of my own background, but I never make the initial evaluation. I always depend on an outside individual evaluation from another psychologist or a psychiatrist, right? So once I get that, put those all together, I also have a team, which includes several doctors, a nurse, a lawyer, and people we all evaluate the information that we have, and then we continue to investigate. Now, how do I determine that a person is really possessed? The church gives us 4 different criteria that can be used as kind of a test, a litmus test, to determine whether or not a person is actually possessed or is suffering from mental illness. Right. So the first of those is that the person has, like in the case of that young girl that I was talking about, they exhibit unnatural physical strength and physical abilities. So, for example, that young girl, in the second time that she was possessed, she ran into all kinds of problems. She was manifesting. Her mother called me one day. They had rushed her to the emergency room, right? And in the emergency room, it took 4 police officers to subdue her, 4 big guys, right? Second of all, they said, this is the report that was given to me. The second thing was, they gave her enough tranquilizer, and they told me that it should have taken down an elephant and had no effect. Right? The doctors and nurses were now in the room to try to evaluate what to do next. They came back into the room and literally found her climbing up the wall. Okay? Pretty good indication. Pretty good indication. So the use of these unnatural physical abilities or strength or whatever, those are pretty good sign. That's one. The second is the ability to know or speak languages which the person has never studied or had any influence. Right? So, for example, I had a case of a man, he actually just called me the other day from New York City. He came to see me initially. He was born in Africa, but raised in the United States. And so he was pretty much convinced that he had demonic influence. And I was saying, okay. So one of the things that I did was I started asking him certain questions. But what I did was I asked him the questions in Latin and ordered him to answer me in English so that everybody understood. And he answered every single question correctly. He never studied Latin, never had an exposure to it. But he answered every question correctly. So he knew the Latin, even though he never studied it or exposed to it. So this ability to know or speak languages that they've never been influenced by or studied. That's the second. The third one is the ability to have knowledge of certain things that they should not know. Okay? So it's really funny. Some of those can be kind of scary. I had a woman who she said she thought she was possessed, and she came in and she was sitting down and we're asking her questions, and she's telling us about the spirits that she sees and coming in and out and going around. And I have 3 or 4 of my team members now, and one of my team members is a woman who is a number of my people are secular third order Carmelites. Okay, one of them was preparing to take the promises. I mean, they take a religious name and they make their promises, right? So she was thinking in her own head different promises, different names that you might take. And during the course of this interview, this woman just looked around and she was talking about different names, different people. Then she turned and she looked at this person and she said, "And did you know that the name such and such means?" And she told her exactly the name that this woman had been thinking about that she was going to choose. Okay? Scared the daylights out of her. But that's what happens sometimes. There's no way that she should have known that, right? Okay, guys, be good.
They're out of here.
And then the other one is an aversion to sacred objects. This particular person, the same person, but in a different setting. They should have heard this one. We're in a church. I told her to come in and meet me in church. The only time she could ever come into the church is when I told her, "I will see you in church." So she comes into the church. I'm sitting in a pew. She's in a pew behind me. 2 of my team members are behind her. Actually, a doctor and a nurse, 2 women. Other team members are standing there. The doctor who's sitting behind her is actually a professor at Milton Hershey School of Medicine. Like a bag, not a purse, but it's a bag that ladies carry sometimes, in which she had a first-class relic. You all know what a first-class relic is, right? And so what she did was, during the course of my conversation with this woman, the woman behind her just kind of gently leaned forward and placed the bag against the back of the pew that she was sitting in. And all of a sudden she screamed, flies up in the air, down on the floor end of the aisle. "What happened? What did you do? What was that all about?" She had no idea, but she felt the presence of that relic against her back. She didn't know it was there, but she not only felt it, but she reacted to it very, very forcefully. Right? Down on the floor she went, screaming. So I had another one, another case, another different woman. Holy water, there's modern blessing of holy water, but then there is the traditional blessing of holy water, which involves exorcisms and the use of blessed and exorcised salt, which is mingled in the water. Okay, so I had one case of a lady one time, and I started sprinkling her with this holy water, and she started screaming. She said, "Well, what is that? That stings." "What's going on?" She said, "I've been blessed with holy water lots of times, but what was different about that?" She was feeling the exorcised salt that was in the water. She had never experienced before, but she was reacting to it. So those are some of the ways in which you can test to see whether or not there's actual demonic influence involved. So going back to your question about the difference between mental illness and spiritual afflictions, the first thing that I would say about that is this. It's never an either or situation. Okay? It's always a combination of the two. For one or two reasons. First of all, because human beings are creatures of body, soul, and spirit. They're total creatures, total beings. And so anything that influences one level of our being influences another. Okay? What we have to do is figure out which is the cause and which is the effect. Right? So we have to determine, is it a spiritual cause that has psychological, because what demons will do is they'll use that spiritual cause, but they'll mimic mental health issues. Or it works the other way around. You can have a person who has mental health problems, okay, but demons take advantage of those. Right? So it works both ways. Now, I was just on the phone last week with a psychiatrist from Virginia about a case, a young girl, teenage girl, and so the woman told me that she's been seeing this girl for about a year, and she's had her on medication for anxiety, for depression, for anger, all kinds of things, and nothing works. And she said she's convinced that this young lady has some really deep-seated anger issues. But she's a psychiatrist. She said, we need to get into a therapist to try to uncover what those deep issues are. But the psychiatrist told me, she said, I'm not Catholic, but I do believe in the presence of the demonic. And I think that what's happening in this case is that this anger inside of her, which she acknowledges is there, but we can't figure out why, is acting almost like a magnet to draw the demonic influence into this girl's life. Okay, so that's what happens. So what you have to actually, in fact, in September, I'm going to be speaking at the Catholic Medical Association conference in Denver, and that's exactly the topic. The title of my talk is "The Chicken or the Egg," which comes first, mental illness or spiritual affliction. Right? And so it ultimately comes down to having to evaluate the case, evaluate the situation, knowing that there's going to be probably both spiritual and mental health issues, but trying to determine which is the cause and which is the symptom, which is the root source and which are the effects, right? Now you have to deal with both, but if you don't figure out, so I had a man come to me and I said, oh, Father, I need an exorcism, you have to deal with it. And I said, no, time out. I said, I'm not denying that you have spiritual problems here. But if I only deal with your spiritual issues, but your fundamental problem is a mental health issue, I'm not doing you any good at all. I'm not helping you, right? Because there's something deeper here that you're not dealing with, that you're not facing, right? So we'll work on both. But let's figure out what's going on down here first in order to see how these two tie together.
So when you're talking about that person who possibly has the anger, does that have to be accompanied by those four kind of?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. The church gives us those four guides, but they're not always necessarily always present. Maybe one might be, they might not be any of them. Like for example, that man I was talking about from Africa, who he had a particular issue. The way I would tested him was this. There is, probably most of you have never heard of it, but there is what's called the Affirmation Creed. Right? The Affirmation Creed is almost like the Apostles' Creed, but it's much longer. Right? Look it up sometime if you have a chance. You can find it in almost any Catholic book someplace. But it's very much longer. But it says things like, the Father is God, and the Son is God, and the Holy Spirit is God, but there is only one God. And it goes on and on and on. Okay? So I made this man recite it after line by line by line. And he was able to do it until we got to any line that had to do with the incarnation, with the Word becoming flesh, Christ becoming man. Anytime we got to any one of those lines, he freaked out. He couldn't do it. He couldn't say it. And you might say, well, why is that? Because the thing that the demons hate the most is the fact that God became man rather than an angel. They are jealous of us because God loved us so much to become one with us. And conversely, to raise us up to the level of divinity, higher even than the angels. Stop and think about that. That's why the devil hates us. That's why he wants to bring us down. And right now, what the devil is intent upon doing is undoing the kingdom of God to create his own kingdom on earth. Stop and think about that. That's what's going on right now. Remember, Jesus said that Lucifer, Satan, is the prince of this world. And he remains the prince of this world until the end of time. Remember, think about that. He has power. He has authority in this world. And he will until the end of time. Until the final victory, which means we're all involved in the battle until the end of time, until the end of our days. You know, we talked about before about temptations. You know, the fathers of the church told us that our temptations will cease about half an hour after we're in bed. You know, that's just the way we are as human beings. Okay, so you know, you asked me questions about real exorcisms, like you see in the room. Yeah, the answer, short answer to that is yes. Here we are. Father Gabriel Amora, ever heard of him? You know, Father Gabriel Amora, yes, no. There's a number of really good books out there by him and about him. Father Amora was in fact the chief exorcist for the Diocese of Rome for many, many years. Okay, died a few years ago. But there's one book I think he wrote with, of course, somebody else entitled "The Devil is Afraid of Me." Right? You should get that and see if you get anything. Amorth, Amora, right? Gabriel Amora. But anyway, Father Gabriel talks about the man who made the movie The Exorcist. Right? William Peter Blatty wrote it, but who made it? I can't remember. Anyway, the producer, I guess, who made the movie, went to see Father Amora, right? And the first thing he asked Father Amora was if he could actually be present at an actual exorcism. And Father Amora said yes. And so he did, and he said that what he experienced in real life was worse than anything that he ever put into his movie. Wow. The second thing was, he asked him if he could record one of the exorcisms, which he did. And he asked Father Amora what he thought about the movie. And actually, Father Amora said, actually, he thought it was pretty good. He said some of the special effects were a little over the top, but on the whole, it was pretty accurate. I mean, I've never seen anybody, you know, spinning their head around. But it has been known, for example, there are, for example, certain curses that people will ingest certain things, eat, drink, things that have been cursed. People have been known to vomit up all kinds of unbelievable things that, you know, they could never swallow, right? So some of that stuff actually does happen, right? So yeah, it can be very, very dramatic at times. Very dramatic. Sure.
Have you ever dealt with any like heritage curses?
I'm sorry?
Like heritage curses? Like
Yes, yes. Let me, yeah, that's good. There's two other things I want to bring up here so I don't forget them. One thing is, please be careful today, especially if unfortunately all the young guys have gone up. No, I'm serious about that because the big thing today is everybody wants to get a tattoo. One of the things that we know very frequently is that the ink that is used in many tattoos today is cursed. Okay. There's a story of a young man who, you know, in his rebellious years, you know, got all kinds of tattoos and piercings and so forth. He went through a conversion process. He wanted to go into religious order, and he wanted to have the tattoos removed, and they couldn't. And they actually had to come in and do an exorcism over the tattoos in order to be able to remove them. Right? And I have a case right now that just came to me yesterday, right? I haven't been able to get in touch, but I called her earlier today, but she hasn't returned the call. Same exact thing. She has a demonic tattoo, right? And she wants to get it off. I'm gonna have to do an exorcism over the tattoo or wherever she has it, I don't know. But we know that in many cases, I mean, sometimes look at the stuff that's outside the tattoo parlors. The symbols are, it's demonic, pure and simple. And we know that very frequently the tattoo ink is cursed. Because it's a problem, yes.
So why doesn't the church make a stance by saying?
I don't know.
They do.
There's a lot of stuff that's going on. Well, it has to do with, I get asked that question a lot about tattoos, and I say, well, the point of it is it's mutilation of the body.
Yeah.
So that is a problem. That's the one. You talk about heritage curses. I was just at a conference in Wichita, Kansas in January, and that was one of the primary discussions that we were discussing. Can curses come down through generations? And the answer is yes, they can. That's happening. So sometimes we have to do healing of generations. But there's another one that a lot of people are not taking seriously enough, especially today, and that's the Freemasons, right? The Freemasons are demonic, pure and simple, right? And more and more and more we have to try to undo some of the damage. I had a case, and it was in another diocese where they did not have an exorcist at the time. And there was a man who was experiencing all kinds of things in his home, things disappearing, things moving, things falling off the walls, this whole story. And so the bishop out there asked for me to come out to that diocese and do it. I had to go through all the legal things, to do it. So we went to this man. And what interestingly enough was the fact that I told him, just like getting rid of all of the other stuff in that house, he had to get rid of all the Masonic stuff that he had from his time in the Masons. And he did, except for one thing. There was a ring, a Masonic ring, which disappeared, which they could not find. Okay? So we had to bring him to church, and we did, and we had to do there's a whole series of enunciations of of Masonic ties. And we went through this whole thing, and we finally went through it all, and lo and behold, the rings, right? Because he has renounced the Masonic ties, the Masonic orders, and then that ring no longer has any power over it, so they destroy it. So, but yes, the Masons are. Now, there's another corollary to that story, just to show you some of the interesting things that I have to deal with. So after that case, after we finished those prayers, the priest of this particular parish says to me, "Since you're here, can you do me a favor?" And I said, "Okay, what's that?" He said, "Come over here." And he took me to this room. And apparently it had been a confessional at one time, a reconciliation room, as it called it. Now they only use it for storage. But he said, a priest who had been pastor here for many, many years was, now when that whole report came out about child abuse, the consort was one of the biggest offenders that was listed on that report. And this is where the abuse occurred. Like hundreds of victims were abused here in this room. And he asked me if I would do an exorcism of that room, which I did, of course. Interestingly enough, I came home. And from that point on, days and days I was feeling myself under attack. And it's hard for me to describe what that means. But I knew that I was being attacked by the demonic. So I called another priest friend of mine, who is a Ukrainian priest, but he's the exorcist of the Ukrainian Archdiocese of Philadelphia. And I went to see him and I said, "Father, I need you to pray over me because I'm under attack." He said, "Okay." So we went to the altar and he began praying these prayers of protection, deliverance over me. And all of a sudden, the church bell started ringing. For no reason, they're on automatic timer. The church bell started ringing. I stop, continues on, and it comes again, and the church bell started ringing the second time. They weren't timed. They shouldn't have been ringing, but they did. So we finished the prayers, and I felt so much better. And he said, "I don't understand it." He said, But every time I mentioned the Immaculate Conception of the Blessed Virgin, the church bells started ringing. And I looked at him and I said, Father, the church that I was in, that you weren't with me, was the church of the Immaculate Conception. Is the supernatural real? You bet. You bet.
You talked about discipline, feeling that Jesus often feeling is discipline.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm not bragging here, but, you know, I've been punched. You know, I know a priest, a good friend of mine who is the exorcist for the Diocese of Tulsa, Oklahoma. One day, right after he was the bishop's secretary, and it was after Easter Sunday, I guess, and he was walking across the sanctuary and he felt he was pushed. He fell down the steps and he injured himself. And shortly thereafter, he was doing an exorcism, and the demon manifested and said, "So how did you like that little push that I gave you?" It's real. It's all real. Yes.
How do you know?
And that's why I said it's really hard to describe it. You know, it's not an ordinary experience that you have, and you just know that it's really hard to describe. It's just difficult, but it's real.
Usually the element to it. So how in our daily life can we recognize? I mean, it's like, oh, I know what's right and I know what's wrong. Are there any like points?
Where the devil's coming in? Oh, okay. Well, you know, okay, here's a really, really interesting question. Here's a challenge to see if you pass the test. What is the single most powerful weapon that we have against the devil?
Rosary.
Anybody else? The sacrament of penance. The sacrament of penance. The sacrament of forgiveness of sins. The sacrament of penance. Now, there's a couple of reasons why that's important. First of all, one thing I beg of you, I beg of you. I'll say one more time, I beg of you. Don't ever write your sins down when you go into confession. I know people do it all the time. I hear the creaking of the paper on the other side of the room. Don't do it. Why not? First of all, because the seal of the confessional is so sacred that anything that you say in the confessional, the devil can't know. It's blocked from his consciousness. He may not know it. However, if you write it down on a piece of paper and you walk out there, you can read it. He's pretty clever. All right. So that's a really important thing. The second thing is this. Please remember what the sacrament of penance is for. Right? The sacrament of penance is intended primarily for mortal sins. Okay? For mortal sins. If you don't have mortal sins to confess, please do not go in with a list of 5, 6, or 7 different things that you want to confess. Because I almost guarantee you that 10 minutes after you walk out, you're going to fall into at least one of them.
Yeah.
Right? Why is that? Right? First of all, because you're not asking yourself the question, the right question. The right question is not what did I do? Why did I do it? I'm going to tell you something interesting. I'll come back to it in a second. Years ago, and again, I'm not breaking the seal on this because of what happened, but years ago, when people come to me in confession, I'm always asking, why did you do that? Why did you do it? What was the cause? What was the reason for it? When I get angry, what do you get angry at? What triggers it? What sets it off? Because if I don't know what's triggering it, then I'm going to fall into it again and again without even thinking about it. It becomes habit, second nature, right? So the point is that if I don't have any moral sins, 1 or 2 things that I really need to be working on, right? That I really want to overcome, right? but I really want to get rid of out of my life. That's how I can overcome the devil, right? By taking my spiritual life seriously, not just going in and treating the sacrament penance like a car wash. And then when dirty cannot claim it's not the same thing, right? But I had years and years ago, I mean, this has been my way of doing it for all my life, right? Years ago, I had a man actually threaten to kill me, right? Because I kept challenging him every time he came into confession, and he would do the same thing, and I would ask him the same question. Why? I don't care why. I just want to come in here, I want to tell you my sins, get absolution, and get out of here. Now, why? What he did was, there was an event at my parish, and the bishop was there, and he went to the bishop publicly at the reception and said to the bishop, "You better do something about that priest because I'm going to kill him." I just said, "I'm not breaking any rules." He said it out loud in front of the bishop and in front of a whole group of people. And he was going to kill me because I kept challenging him. Why do you do that particular thing? Not just what, but why. Right? So if you want to make a good confession, if you want to put the devil on the run, work on one or two things that need to be worked on, but ask yourself the question, why? Why do I do this? What's the reason for it? What's the trigger? What's setting it off? Then I know, well, then that's how I grow spiritually. But the sacrament penance is the single most powerful weapon we have against the devil. The sacrament, but we have, want to go back to that self-consciousness versus self-awareness. And I take a good objective look at myself and honestly look at myself and I say, here's where I've got problems, here's what I need to work on, here's what I need help with. That's how we grow, and that's what it is. So, yeah, with that, I hope I answered the question.
Would that be more of something you would do with the spiritual director?
No. Spiritual direction and confession are two separate things. Even people who come to me for spiritual direction, and I have a list this long, I never will combine them. I always say, okay, let's go to your direction first, and then if you want to go to confession, but not all of my directors go to confession. Okay, no, they're two distinct things. Two distinct things. I'm sorry, yes, sir, you have it.
How do you take people to protect themselves, or how would you just someone that is
Okay, how do you confess? First of all, we did talk about some of these things before. First of all, prayer, right? Number one, prayer. Number two, confession on a regular basis. Number three, Mass and Holy Communion. And then yes, the rosary is powerful. I'm not putting it down. I mean, it's a very powerful weapon. The St. Benedict medal and the Brown Scapular. Right? Those are all very, okay. Again, the Brown Scapular people, I guess, especially for younger people who don't know this, you can't just get a scapular, have it blessed, and put it on. You have to be enrolled in the Brown Scapular. Okay, I did that to somebody this morning. All right, you have to be enrolled in it. It's the only scapular that has to be done that way, right? And then once you're enrolled in it, if it breaks or tears, you can just get rid of it and get a new one because it's the person who is enrolled in it. It's not the scapular itself, right? So Brown Scapular, wear that, very good powerful. So that's the whole, it's a good Catholic life, prayer, the sacraments, fasting, penance, all those good things. Right? Yes, ma'am.
So I know some people that they're like going to fortune
Yep.
tellers. But anyway, they say that if people can tell them things about themselves that haven't happened yet, or that that has happened to them, they don't talk about it at all in their meetings.
Sure. One thing to remember about the devil is this. He's been around for a long time. He was around before human beings were. And the devil does not get tired, he doesn't take a vacation, he doesn't have to go to a party, he doesn't need to eat, all right? So he's around all the time. Not only does he know human nature intimately, but he knows each of us intimately, right? Because he's watched everything. So even though he can't read our thoughts, this is an important thing to remember too. The devil cannot read your thoughts. Not possible, right? But he knows you so well that he can look you in the face and say, I know what's going on. By her attitude, by her, facial features, all he can read. So he can know our past, right? But he can also guess pretty well what's coming down the pipe, just based on So, yeah, but he's a liar. He's a liar. He went somewhere. You know, all kinds of things. Yes, ma'am.
Father, I had read that in 1917, when Our Lady appeared to the children of Fatima, she had said that God would give the devil 100 years of free reign. Have you heard that?
No, that's.
Okay.
Pope Leo the 13th, right? In his famous apparition that he had at the after mass when I had a vision in which he saw the devil and Christ in conversation. And the devil said, give me enough time and enough power, and I will destroy your church. Okay. And here's the important thing. He said, Christ said to Satan, you have the time and you will have the power. They don't necessarily coincide. Okay. They don't necessarily coincide. And I'm going to go out on a limb since you brought it up, and since we have enough older athletes here. Many years ago, back in the 1980s, I was on an 11-day priest retreat in Paris. And during the course of that retreat, the bishop, who was our retreat master, brought in a priest to speak to us, whose name was Father Macias. Everybody who really studies the history of Fatima will come across that name, because Father Macias was actually the ex-official archivist of Fatima. And he told us, remember it very clearly, he told us that there was a previously unknown copy of the third secret, which he found. Okay? Now, how it came about was this. When Francisco had already died, and Jacinta was in the hospital in Lisbon dying from the flu, Lucia was going back onto her old stuff again. She was by herself. And Jacinta was worried that Lucia would fail to transmit a copy of the third secret to the bishop, like she had been told to do. And so what happened was, Jacinta asked the Mother Superior of the hospital, of course it was all Catholic, to come, and she dictated the third secret to the Mother Superior to make sure that it got to the bishop. Being the very, formal, polite, refined lady that she had been, the Mother Superior took the copy, but then she recopied it to send to the bishop. The original copy that she wrote found its way into the archives. That's what Father Macias found. Okay. Now, what he told us, and when they announced that they were going to reveal the third secret, I was like really excited, because I already knew from the archivist some of the things that were in the third secret. Only they didn't come out. What Father Macias told us was in the third secret, a lady named by name 4 countries that would be destroyed. Remember one of the top things that said several nations? She actually named 4 nations. And Lucia, Sister Lucia, wanted those to be released because if they knew, maybe they would convert. When the third secret, quote unquote, was released, we didn't have a message. All we had was a vision, but there was no message attached to it. To this day, I am convinced that they have not released the full text of the third secret. And it's not based on speculation, it's based on my own experiences in Fatima many years. Okay. So
Why wouldn't that?
I have no idea. But I just know that I knew and it didn't happen. And so I know there's more to the story. No, because he wouldn't tell us. We kept asking him, well, what are the 4 countries? And he said, no, I can't tell you any more than that. That was as much as I knew, as much as he told us. And so I know there's more, and it didn't come out. So anyway, do I lead an interesting life or what? Anyway, sir.
I was a guy at 92. Yes.
that somebody would put her in to the meeting and take her out because not a lot of time. She was, I mean, I want to give the little girl something to eat, but I'm afraid. And this is so true. Now, is this part of the brain growing old? Or is this? No, that's a good question. I honestly think that's about. I've known several people who are going through this. In fact, we have one right now in the parish. I talk to her husband every night. Yeah, it's possible that it's dementia, but it's also possible that, see, one of the things we have to realize is the fact that, when I was talking about before, we make the mistake of thinking, now here's the natural world and here's the supernatural world, but they're not. That's not the way it is, all right? The natural and supernatural interpenetrate each other, right? As Catholics, the whole basis of our faith is the incarnation. The Word became flesh. God has entered into human experience. That's the whole basis of the sacramental life of the Catholic Church. Every one of the sacraments has an external appearance, but a deeper interior reality. The divine penetrates and lives within the natural. Okay, so it's very possible that some people may have certain experiences which seem to be out of the ordinary, but in fact it just may be, and there are possible people who, they'll say, they have second sight or things like that. In some cases, that's true. In some cases, people do have the ability to know certain things in advance. Okay, it happens. Trust me, it does happen. Okay, and it's not always necessarily maybe sometimes it's a supernatural grace of God, and maybe sometimes it's a preternatural holdover of our, original creation before the fall. It could be a lot of different ways, right? So it's possible that it could have been real and not necessarily supernatural. Okay, questions? Any other questions?
Let's do one or two more questions. Is that
Two
okay?
more questions.
Okay, all right.
Two more questions. So did you have? What one question? Well, what's the process? Okay. First of all, because what is the actual process of driving on a demon? Well, again, I think part of it has to do with what was discovering what was the legal reason why the demon was there in the first place. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing that you try to do is you try to figure out. You are allowed to ask, what is your name? What is the demon's name? Okay, and now the truth of the matter is that the name that the demon will give you is not necessarily your actual name, because angels really don't have names. Okay, the only names that we have are the three archangels. All right, but remember something important: those names are not personal identifications. All three of those names are actually expressions of their activity. All right, so Michael, who is like unto God. Gabriel is the strength of God. Raphael is the healing of God. See, angels don't have persons as such. All right, and actually the church has forbidden the use of any other names other than those three that are found in Scripture. All right, for any archangel. So what we do is when we find out, well, what's your name? Usually what happens is that gives us a clue as to what gave the demon the right to be there in the first place. So a lot of times it might be a sexual sin, it might be with the occult, or those sorts of things. So you have to figure that out. And then there are specific prayers that can be used to attack that particular thing. But then there's the church has a regular ritual, right? There's a regular ritual of exorcism. There are actually two different rituals right now. There's a modern form and there's a traditional form. For the more difficult cases, we use the traditional form, which is in Latin. For cases that are quite so hard, we might use the modern form in English. But there's a ritual that is followed, okay? And we use relics, we use holy water, we use all of the kinds of things during the actual course of the process of exorcism itself. But it can get pretty hairy sometimes. We have a special lounge chair, which is padded because people have become violent and so forth. And I have 2 or 3 men on my team that are, I call them my muscle men. I'm very serious, you know, they're there to hold them down because people can really freak out, right? But we just do the ritual as often as we need to be able to guide people down. That's who they are, why they're there, and then in the name of Jesus Christ, get out of here. Pure and simple, that's what it is. Then you follow the ritual, because it's not me, it's the church, it's Jesus Christ who's doing it. Does that answer your question? That's one last question.
When you look at people who are
Yes.
something that they're like walking to the church and they're down.
Yes. Yeah. You know, the interesting thing is, first of all, anybody who comes to me and says, I need an exorcism, I think I'm possessed. Very serious. But what might happen is the person would say, these things are happening. I was trying to climb, I don't know where I am. And then they're telling me something that then they're probably possessed. So that's again some of the ways in which we're not to make a distinction between the two. Those are all clues. You have to almost become a detective in order to be able to figure it out. Because you just don't jump in there and automatically assume a person's possessed. Now, that's a last resort. Because there's many other prayers of deliverance and healing and so forth that can be done that might be able to handle the situation without going forward. Besides which, in order to do an actual exorcism, I have to get the bishop's permission specifically. I can't just do it on my own. If I reach the point where I say, no, this person is possessed, I need to do an actual exorcism. I have to wait to the bishop and to do it. Because he's the prime exorcist. Okay? Dominus vobiscum. Dice Deus canti Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti descendat super vos et moniat semper. Amen. God bless you all.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Feel free to get treats on your way out, guys. Thank you. Thank you, Father. Justin, sorry.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Let me just stop recording this. Yeah. Stop.